evening and welcome to all our lecture series on English headset. Particularly, we are focusing on one of the prominent period in history of English literature, that is the Romantic period, right? So, English literature we are talking about, and the prominent period that we are focusing very particularly that we have discussed so far is the Romantic period. And so far, guys, we have talked about two prominent figures of our Romantic period, that is William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. William Wordsworth being one of the prominent figure of this period. We have seen his bit of background prior to that. In our yesterday's lecture, we have talked about. We have given a brief background to what is actually Romanticism mean, how it is a kind of a movement, how this period is totally different from all the other periods or all the other remarkable time spans of history of English literature we have seen so far, and how Romantic period literally differs from all the other periods particularly, right? And while talking about what is Romantic period, how it got began, exactly how it got commenced, and what were the themes that were discussed. We talked about the features of this period, right? And while talking about, we also talked about again another very important figure, that is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Exactly. These two people, by the way, are called as the for information. These two are called as the first generation. Yes, they are labelized as the first generation of this Romantic period very particularly, and so they are very much important, very much significant otherwise, because they play a kind of a key role, a very vital role otherwise. And we see that the various literature that they have been famous so far. Exactly. Now talking about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, otherwise people, sorry, to talk about the work by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his contribution so far, it is much more important to highlight on what he has done so far. Now, while talking about the work by William Wordsworth, his famous lyrical lyrical ballads, exactly, and then few of his quotes, which we have talked so far. Now, talking about what S.T. Coleridge has done, his prominently the Biographia, the very his most famous work that we have talked so far is, apart from that, not this one otherwise, but the Biographia Literaria, which remains again a significant role, right? And so far we have discussed about it. Now let us go and start actually discussing about his one of the prominent works that we have yet to continue with, by the way. And we have talked about so far William Wordsworth and his Biographia Literaria, Coleridge's Biographia Literaria. Now we are going to continue with Charles Lamb, again one of the prominent figure of English literature, right? So let's start talking about Charles Lamb, who remains again one of the significant figures. He was born, Charles Lamb. He was born in London and was an English writer and essayist, best known for his essays of Elia and for the children books Tales from Shakespeare, right? Which he produced with his sister Mary Lamb. Again, her time span covers from 1764 to 1847, particularly. Right? He tried his hand in poetry, romance, and drama as well. And his friend William Godwin promoted him to write Tales from Shakespeare, the book that he wrote for children exactly. So he wrote a poem in 1798 called Blank Verse along with Charles Lloyd. His father, Charles Lamb's father, was a lawyer. He was a lawyer's clerk particularly, and he worked in a Charles Lamb. He personally worked in accountant's office for British East India Company for 25 years. So Rosamund Grey is the story of a young man named Alan Clare who loves Rosamund Grey, but their relationship comes to nothing because of a sudden death of Miss Gray. So Rosamund Gray is another interesting story that he has portrayed. Charles Lamb has portrayed, and the character that he has introduced here remains again one of the interesting characters. Both Charles and Mary suffered a period of mental illness. Mary's illness was the strongest, in which she stabbed her mother in a rag and admitted in a mental hospital, that is Fisher House. Charles wrote a letter to Coleridge about matricide in 1796 when his mother was killed. His mother got killed by mistake by his sister. So he wrote a letter considering Coleridge as his best friend. And so the first publication was in 1796 when four sonnets by Charles Lamb of India House appeared in Coleridge's poems on various subjects. So, as we say, Coleridge and Wordsworth then were the most celebrated people. They had got a lot of fame. So somehow Charles Lamb could be seen taking, kind of not like a shelter, but assassins or showing some sort of associates. So his poems too will get kind of a recognition. But apart from that, it's not just only about getting the recognition, but kind of having, overlooked by somebody who is quite intellectually sound in, writing a poetry or criticizing a literary work. So Coleridge was something like that, that was considered by Charles Lamb, and he went to him, and in his work only, his four of the poetries got published. So his first publication was 1796. Four sonnets by Charles Lamb of India House appeared in Coleridge's poems on various subjects. His tragedy John Woodville was published in 1800. His farce Mr. H was performed at Drury Lane in 1807. Now, in 1807, Tales from Shakespeare was also published, which Charles Lamb wrote tragedies while Mary wrote comedies. Charles Lamb never married in his life. His collected essays were published in 1823 under the title Essays of Elia. His essay of Elia was criticized by Robert Southey in Quarterly Review entitled The Progress of Infidelity. The Progress of Infidelity was the name that was criticized by. So now these annotations, people, I think are very much important, keeping the NET and SET examination into our vision, because the prominent work by a very particular person and the commentary on that work by another critics, and then the title given to the commentary by those critics, while particular, let's say there is A author and there are B, C, D critics who have criticized on the works of A author, right? Now these BCD critics have definitely made some several comments on those works, and those comments, those titles are very much necessary because they are in association with the work produced by author A. Okay, so here we have got Charles Lamb, and then there are some other people, those who have made a kind of a critical work on what Charles Lamb has tried to express through the literature. So we have got Robert Southey here. Is a quarterly review entitled "The Progress of Infidelity is Important," which is kind of a criticism on essays of Elia. The last essay of Elia was published in 1833. Coleridge called Lamb the general-hearted Lamb. Exactly, the general-hearted Lamb was a title given to Lamb by whom? It was by S.T. Coleridge. He wrote a letter to matricide to Coleridge, and the principal biographer of Lamb was E.V. Lucas. Lamb first fell in love with Anne Simmons, right? In Juvenile Library, William Godwin contributed with Lamb. Exactly. Now, if there would be a question, which work Lamb has contributed, who has contributed with Lamb in Juvenile Library? It was William Godwin, his best friend, who also promoted him, or in a way, can we say, motivated him to come up with his tales from Shakespeare. The South Sea House is the first essay in Essays of Elia. In this essay, he used the pseudonymy Elia. Pseudonym means the name which is quite false or fictitious. It was given by him, the Elia, for himself, whereas Mary Lamb appears as a cousin Bridget. Exactly, she's a cousin Bridget who works over there with the essay hymn. Now Lamb composed a poem, Farewell to Tobacco. Lamb spoke his father under the name of Lowell, exactly, and in his essay, Elia on the Old Benches, he created a portrait of his father. Now it was an Elia. The character that he portrayed Elia in his essays was he himself, exactly. So now look at his major works and what those works permanently talk about. These are the around seven essays that are included in Essays of Elia. Apart from that, A Tale of Rosamund Grey, then Poor Blind Margaret, and Blank Verse, and John Woodville, the poetic drama that he has written so far. Now, which essays are included in Essays of Elia? The Two Races of Man, Mrs. Bottle's Opinion on Waste, Miss My First Play, Sanity of True Genius, Confession of a Drunkard, A Bachelor's Complaint of the Behavior of Married People, etc. A Dream Children, a Reverie. Dream Children, a Reverie. And then A Tale of Rosamund, then Poor and Blind Margaret, then Blank Verse, and John Woodville are the several compositions that he has written so far. Right now, few of the other added are Mr. H, then Tales from Shakespeare, then Adventures of Ulysses, then Specimens of English dramatic poets who lived about the time of Shakespeare, then On the Tragedies of Shakespeare, and then Witches and Other Night Fears. So these are the around 11 works we have got listed over here, which are quite important according to the exam point of view, and we are supposed to have a look at those things. Okay, now we are just covering. Initially, I had thought that I would be focusing on only the major works that have been so far, but keeping the natives examination, I think it is much more important to have a look at all the other people who also have contributed some or the other extent into the English literature that got produced in the Romantic period. Now, their themes may not be completely aligning with what was happening around, taking the Romantic idealism with them, but some or the other way, their work definitely makes noteworthy, or it is an impactful act. It remain an impactful act on society otherwise. Fine. So, after Charles Lamb, we have got again one of the important character, that is Leigh Hunt. Uh, James Henry Leigh Hunt is commonly known as Leigh Hunt. He was an English critic, essayist, poet, and writer. His poems were published under the title Juvenilia, Juvenile, and Juvenilia. In 1807, he wrote for newspaper and published a volume of theatre criticism and a series of classic tales with critical essays on authors. So he's a prominent, or he's a main, his a core part could be seen as a critic only. Hunt's early essays were published by Edward Quine, editor and owner of The Traveller. In 1808, he became editor of a newspaper founded by his brother John Hunt, exactly, and the name of the newspaper was The Examiner. In 1813, through his newspapers, he attacked Prince Regent, which resulted in prosecution and a sentence of 2 years. So he got a punishment of 2 years in a prison, particularly he got a prison. Now, number of essays were written between 1814 to 1817. The Examiner under the series title The Round Table, published in 2 volumes in 1870. And there were 12 essays by Hunt and 40 essays were by Hazlitt. So these are the two prominent, again, a few, one of the prominent figures of Romantic period. In 1810 and 11, he edited a quarterly magazine, The Reflector. In this, he wrote The Feast of the Poets, which offended many contemporary poets. Right. So this work again remains, one of the important factor for us. It was in 1810 that he edited a quarterly magazine called The Reflector, and he wrote with the title The Feast of the Poets, which in a way offended many contemporary poets. Now in 1819 to 21, Hunt edited The Indicator. It was a weekly published by Joseph Appelard. Francesca the Rimini told in Dante's Inferno. Okay, so he made a mark in English by publishing the story of Rimini based on the tragic episode of Francis the Rimini told in Dante's Inferno. In 1818, he appeared a collection of poems entitled Foliage. In 1819, appeared Hero and Leander, Bacchus and Ariadne. Exactly. Then he published a book, Poetical Works, that contains his two works, A Story of Rimini and The Descent of Library. He had a group named Hunt Circle or Cockney School. Cockney School. Again, it includes, now this is again very much important. It was named by Leigh Hunt. Exactly, it was a school, exactly, which is called as Hunt Circle or Cockney School. And who were there? There were some prominent figures again who got a fame in their later period or later life very prominently. But this wouldn't have thought of Lee Hunt's mind then when he created this something, a circle of great people around him. And who were there in that? Let's have a look at those people. Lee Hunt, John Keats, William Hazlitt, P.B. Shelley, Charles Lamb, Brian Proctor, then John Hamilton Reynolds, Walter Coulson, C.W. Dilke, Charles Cowden Clarke. So these are the prominent figures, at least. Exactly. Now, when you read this name, John Keats, William Hazlitt, P.B. Shelley, Charles Lamb, exactly, then Brian Proctor, at least these are the prominent names which we ourselves are aware of, or we have read much of these poets, so we already we are able to recognize them that they, yes, they exist, exactly, right. Apart from them, there are also a few names like Walter Coulson, then C.W. Dilke. These are the names exactly we need to keep in mind about those names. So some popular Hunt's poems are Jenny Kissed Me, Above Ben Adam. Above Ben Adam, again a very popular poem that has been read by many. A Night Rain in Summer. Now in 1828, he published Lord Byron and some of his contemporaries. He also wrote London Journal. He also edited Monthly Repository. And in 1818, Tory Blackwood magazine called him the meanest, the filthiest, and the most vulgar of Cockney poetsters. Exactly. So the group, exactly, Hunt Circle or Cockney poets. Cockney, exactly, was the name that he had given to that circle, Cockney poets. So the filthiest, the meanest, was the kind of the most vulgar, exactly, was the title given. It was, he was called and criticized in Troy's Blackwood magazine. The original title of his poems, Jenny Kissed Me, is Rendezvous. The story of Rimini is based on the tragic episode of Francis the Rimini. So it is much more important to have a look at those titles again that he has created so far, keeping the NET set examination into our vision, people, right? Until and unless we have a look at those things, it is much more, it won't be, that way success for us to have a look at those ideas. Moving further, we have Thomas De Quincey, again another important figure of this period, otherwise much more important, right? So let's go and have a look at him. Thomas Spencer De Quincey was an English essayist best known for his Confessions of an English Opium Eater. De Quincey inaugurated addiction literature in England. He was the son of a merchant. He was born in Manchester, England. After reading lyrical ballads, he was relieved from depression. In July 1818, De Quincey became editor of Westmoreland Gazette, a Tory newspaper. He resigned from the post in November 1890. De Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater and Charles Lamb's Essay of Elia both appeared together in the London Magazine in 1823. Suspiria de Profondi and The English Mail Coach appeared in Blackwood Magazine. John of Arc was published in Tate's Magazine. Then the 22 volumes of De Quincey's writings were issued from 1851 to 1859. Now, in 1850, De Quincey was a regular contributor to Edinburgh periodical called Hogg's Weekly Instructor. The 1856 edition, The Confession of an English Opium Eater, was prepared for the inclusion in Selections Grave and Gay, published by James Hogg. The first volume of Selection Grave and Gay appeared in May 1853 and 14th and last appeared in 1860. De Quincey's diary was published in 1827. Literary Reminiscence is his famous critical work. This contains brilliant appreciation of Wordsworth, Charles Lamb, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, Thomas Hazlitt, and Landor. Then, On the Knocking at the Gate of Macbeth is his brilliant critical essay. Right? So, if you have a question, which is the famous essay exactly by Thomas De Quincey, that portrays Macbeth. It is the On the Knocking at the Gate of Macbeth. On Murder, considered as one of the fine arts, is a humorous essay by Dickens. A series of 30 articles were collected by him in 1853 called Autobiographic Sketches. Logic of a Political Economy, the essay on style and rhetoric, and philosophy of Herodotus are also important works by him. So he was a critic, in a way, and a major contributor of Romantic period otherwise. So Encyclopedia Britannica was an article on Goethe, Pope, Schiller, and Shakespeare. Is a famous quote: "Not to sympathize is not to understand. Not to sympathize in a way. Not to sympathize is not to understand." This is a famous quote. What famous? So if you have a question, whose quote is this? Not to sympathize is not to understand. William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, Thomas de Quincey, or Thomas Hazlitt? It is definitely Thomas de Quincey. De Quincey is known for living for 10 years in 5 cottages. He addresses the problem of plagiarism in Coleridge's work. Now, let's have a look at his major works that have contributed so far in a great number otherwise. The Confession of an English Opium Eater, published in 1821, Letters to a Young Man, then Joan of Arc, The Revolt of Tartars, English Mail Coach, Dreamfuge, then Suspiria de Profondi, it means Science from the Depth, right? Then Clostrim or The Mask, again a novel. Autobiographic Sketches, there are 30 articles that published in 1853. Logic of Political Economy, The Essay on Style and Rhetoric, Philosophy of Herodotus, Encyclopedia Britannica, On the Knocking at the Gate of Macbeth, published in 1823, On Murder, considered as one of the fine arts, 1827, Lake Reminiscence, that is literary reminiscence, then Revolt of Tartars, and Recollection of the Lake Poets. Now, looking at his major works, The Confession of an English Otter, it is written by De Quincey on the account of his opium and alcohol addict. It was the first major work of De Quincey. Firstly, it was published anonymously in September 1821 in London Magazine, but it was released in 1822 in the book form. It was organized into 2 parts. Part 1 begin with a notice to the reader. I here present you, courteous reader, with a record of a remarkable period in my life. A revised edition was published in 1856 for the publisher James Hogg. The edition was spoiled by revision particularly. Right. Then the second prominent work is On the Murder, considered as one of the fine arts. It is an essay by De Quincey, first published in 1827 in Blackwood magazine. It was a fictional and satirical essay, and it addressed particularly to a gentleman's club concerning the aesthetic appreciation of murder. It focuses particularly on a series of murders allegedly committed by John Williams in 1811. This work followed the sequels as one of the fine arts in 1839 and postscript in 1854. De Quincey, again a prominent figure, also referred to the Williams murder in his On the Knocking at the Gate of Macbeth. Then his Suspiria de Profondi. It is a Latin phrase that means science from the depth, and this was published in a fragmentary form in 1845. It is a collection of short essays in psychological fantasy. De Quincey called psychological fantasy as impassioned prose, but not termed as a prose poetry. First, it appeared in Blackwood's magazine in 1845. It is an incomplete work, and that's by Thomas De Quincey. Now, he's an English Mail Coach. It is an essay written in 3 parts: The Glory of Motion, The Vision of Sudden Death, Dreamfuge, founded on the precedings theme of sudden death. And then his autobiographical sketches. It is also called Autobiography of Thomas De Quincey. This autobiography was not deliberately written, but it was a collection of unpublished, articles. So this was all about Thomas De Quincey, who remains again one of the prominent figure, in Romantic period, not just in Romantic period, but the entire English literature, and his critical essays, his commentaries, exactly, and his explanations are definitely noteworthy. Again, now let's move to the finest lyricist and the epic poet in the English language, P.B. Shelley, who remains a remarkable personality. People, his poems, his sonnets, his elegies are like anything, and so he remains somebody who is quite parallel to Wordsworth. Now we cannot have a comparison over here, but somebody who, like Coleridge and Parallel, had possessed the immense amount of romantic ideology was P.B. Shelley. Exactly. P.B. Shelley was an atheist, and Wordsworth was a pantheist who believed that God is present everywhere. Shelley was completely opposite to that. Yet, the romantic notion that God emerged in Romantic period could be seen finely handled by none other than P.B. Shelley. Exactly, and he was best known for his classical poems and his elegies, very particularly the way he wrote them. Right. So let's go and talk about Percy Bysshe Shelley. Yes, P.B. Shelley. He was the finest lyric and epic poet in English language. He is best known for classical poems such as, now we have got a list of his poems, and they remain quite noteworthy and important because the kind of a contribution he has made so far and the various poems he has written are definitely remarkable, and yet they are prescribed. Yet they are prescribed in many universities. In a way, they are prescribed in many universities and have been studied by many great scholars. So I've got a list of him. Then the first one is Epiphysian, then Ozymandias, The Triumph of Life, Ode to the West Wind, then Prometheus Unbound, To a Skylark, then Adonias, then Music, The Revolt of Islam, When Soft Voices Die, Alastor, The Cloud, Queen Mab, The Mask of Anarchy, The Cincy, a verse drama. William Godwin, again, the one who helped Charles Lamb to complete his masterpiece, The Tales from Shakespeare. He is a father in law to P.B. Shelley. Shelley's theory of economics and mortality has a profound influence on Karl Marx, Leo Tolstoy, and Mahatma Gandhi. Civil disobedience movement by Henry Thoreau is also influenced by Shelley. He was born in England's Sussex. His first publication was a Gothic novel, Zastrozzi, a romance. In 1810, Shelley published original poetry by Victor and Kaiser along with his sister Elizabeth. At Oxford, he issued a collection of verses, posthumous fragments of Margaret Nicholson and Thomas Jefferson Hogg. Matthew Arnold assessed Shelley as an ineffectual angel. Ineffectual angel. Shelley's The Cenci uh, is dedicated to Leigh Hunt, the one who formed the Hunt Circle or Cockney poets. In Mont Blanc, Shelley claims to have pondered questions of historical inevitability. He dedicated his The Revolt of Islam to Mary Shelley, and Byron introduced Shelley to Keats. Lord Byron had a good connection with John Keats. So we find that they both poets were brought together on a friendly note by Lord Byron. Shelley's death came in 1822 by drowning while sailing across the Bay of Spezia. Hudson called Shelley Dreamers of Dreams and Dreamers of Dreams. In 1811, Shelley published his second Gothic novel, Saint Irvine, or the Rosicrucian, and a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism. After the publication of The Necessity of Atheism, he gained the attention of the Oxford University's administration. He was asked to stop the pamphlet, but he refused and was expelled from the university on 25th March 1811 along with Thomas Hogg. On 20th August 1811, he eloped with Harriet Westbrook to Scotland. Shelley called Elizabeth Hitchener, a 28 years old unmarried school teacher, the sister of my soul and my second self. Shelley was totally unhappy with his marriage to Harriet and abandoned her in 1840. Harriet committed suicide in 1816. Godwin was Shelley's mentor at Eton College. At Eton College, he was nicknamed Mad Shelley. Shelley married Mary Wollstonecraft, Godwin's daughter. He was buried in the Protestant cemetery in Rome. On his grave, the following lines from Shakespeare's The Tempest are inscribed: Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. He wrote preface to his wife's Frankenstein. A.C. Swinburne called Shelley a perfect singing god. His famous line, Our sweetest songs are those that tell the saddest thought. It is from To a Skylark. He wrote 18 sonnets. His Necessity of Atheism, you know, he wrote, There is no God. This negation must be understood solely to affect a creative deity. The hypothesis, the hypothesis of free pervading spirit co-eternal with the universe remains unshaken. His The Devil's Walk, a ballad, is a satirical attack and criticism of the British government by Shelley. It was a major poetical work published in 1820. Then Epipsychion is a Greek title that means the little soul. It is a major poetical work published in 1821, subtitle Verses addressed to the noble and unfortunate lady Emilia, Emilia, Emilia V, now imprisoned in convent of. In this poem, Shelley celebrates his platonic love for Beatrice, a beautiful young Italian girl. Shelley's famous quote from To a Skylark are, Our sweetest songs are those that tell the saddest of thought. Hope is strong, justice and truth their winged child have found, is the epigraph on the cover page of The Mask of Anarchy, is taken from The Revolt of Islam. He remarked about a poet as a poet is a nightingale who sits in darkness and sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet sounds. His auditors are as men entranced by the melody of an unseen musician who feels that they are moved and softened, but know not whence or why. Now let us have a major work of P.B. Shelley. The one is Lastrosi, a romance, then original poetry by Victor and Kazire. Uh, now, before them, next to them, we have given the list of their publications in bracket. I won't be reading them all because once you go through them all, you will have a realization that how these works are major and their appearance in various time span matters the most. The Necessity of Atheism, The Devil's Walk, a ballad, Queen Mab, a philosophical poem, Alastor or The Spirit of Solitude, a Daemon of the World or Mont Blanc, Hymn to Intellectual Beauty, Leon and Sitna or The Revolution of the Golden City, a vision of the 19th century. It was edited and reissued as The Revolt of Islam, a poem in 12 cantos, 1817. Ozymandias, a sonnet written in iambic pentameter, preface of Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. Then Rosalind and Helen, a modern eclogue. Then Cenci, a tragedy written in 5 acts. Ode to West Wind, The Mask of Anarchy, Julian and Madello. Then Prometheus Unbound, a lyrical drama in 4 acts. Then To a Skylark, then Adonius, then A Defense of Poetry that he wrote, one of the prominent uh, critical work by him. then Epipsychian Hellas, a lyrical drama, then Triumph of Life, and England in 1819. It is a sonnet. England in 1819. Now let us have a brief look at his prominent works. Then the one is Adonais. It appeared after the death of John Keats in 1821. Keats' death was because of a tuberculosis, but Shelley got the impression that his death was due to brutal criticism of his poetry. So he wrote Adonais to mourn the death of Keats. So it is kind of like an elegy written for expressing his lamentation over the death of John Keats. Again, one of the pioneering factor poet of Romantic period, was famous for his quote on beauty and his poems describing the beauty of nature. The defense of poetry. It was originally written in 1821 in response to Thomas Love Peacock, the Four Ages of Poetry, but published in 1840. He begins his essay by distinguishing between reason and imagination. Now, when we talked about the history of English literary criticism and literary critical theories that have got evolved after, along with the literature, we have talked about we have literally talked about P.B. Shelley as a critic, and what are the various comments that he has made exactly to defend what poetry literally means, and it is written in Thomas Love Peacock's The Four Ages of Poetry. Right? He defines reason as a logical thought and imagination as a perception. He states that poetry is the expression of imagination of the poet. So, as per Shelley, a poem is the very image of life expressed by in its eternal truth, and while poetry is a mirror which makes beautiful, right, that which is distorted. And as per Shelley, the poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. They create the law, they bring the harmony, they make the law they make the world function, they make the world happen or function in a lawful way, was a kind of a statement we find him making over here. And so he remains, in a way, an interesting person again. Moving ahead, uh, Gerald Lucas states that Shelley believes poetry to be divine since it provides the seed for all humanity's creation, religions, institutions, politics, philosophy, and technology altogether. As per him, the poetry's primary purpose is to focus on revealing the beauty in the world that is apparently hidden from people, and such is the duty of the poet to bring out that beauty which is hidden in the world around. Now is another prominent work, Ode to the West Wind. It was written in 1819 but published with the volume of Prometheus Unbound in 1820. This is written in terza rima, consisting a stanza of three lines A B A B C B C D C. Now he wrote a note about this poem, and it goes: this poem was conceived and chiefly written in a wood that skirts Arno near Florence, and on a day when the tempestuous wind, whose temperature is at once mild and animating, was collecting the vapors which pour down the autumn rains. This poem is addressed to the west wind. The poet appeals to the west wind to infuse him with a new spirit and a new power to spread his ideas. The west wind is personified both as a preserver and as a destroyer. The speaker here, Shelley, describes the effect of west wind on land, air, and water. He wants to be like wind's lair and implores the wind to blow his thoughts over the universe so that they might become seeds to cause a new birth. Look at such a kind of a manifestation that he is trying to make through the poem. Kind of imagination, the kind of a determination he comes up with. How determined his thoughts are. No, look at his optimism in a way. The opening lines of O to the West Wind are: O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead. So he involves the wild west wind of autumn which scatters the dead leaves and spreads it so that they may be nurtured by the spring, and asks that the wind, the destroyer and the preserver. No, he calls the wind the dirge of the dying year, and describes how it stirs up violent storms, and again implores it to hear him. The important line is, if winter comes and can spring be far behind. Exactly, this is the prominent line. Then Queen Mab, again his uh, one of the influential works. So we've got a list of his works which are famous. Let's go and have a look at those works. Yes, we are talking about Queen Mab. It is the earliest poetic work of Shelley, produced in 1813. The poem is immature and contains much of Shelley's cruder atheism. It represents Shelley's mind, for which he was expelled from Oxford. This poem is an attack on dogmatic religion, government, industrial tyranny, and war, in which he presents a world of his dreams, free from tyranny of kings and barons, businessmen. Exactly. So the poet hopes that soon there will be the dawn of a new millennium where everything will be for the good of mankind, in which the force of tyranny, oppression, and cruelty will disappear. Now, he hopes that in the new world, lion and lamb shall live together. The lion now forgets the thirst of blood. There might you see him sporting in the sun. Are the lines that describe that. So he consists of 9 cantos. After the substantial reworking, a revised edition of portion of the text was published in 1816 under the title "The Demon of the World." Is another masterpiece is Alastor of the Spirit of Solitude. Alastor or the Spirit of Solitude. This was published in 1816. It is a kind of a spiritual autobiography, where the chief character, a shadowy projection of Shelley's own moods, travels through a wilderness in a quest for the ideal beauty. This poem represents the wandering of traveler, where he has portrayed himself otherwise, and it is in search of ideal beauty. The traveler wanders through Athens, Babylon, then Jerusalem. Still, he comes to the valley of Kashmir, where he sees a vision. Now, in the vision, a beautiful girl emerges before him, and the traveler is captivated by her beauty. The vision soon disappears, and the traveler moves ahead, passing through all barriers, but success doesn't greet him. Such is the story. But he doesn't lose courage, and continues ahead in search of a great secrets of life. A faint picture or that he got of Kashmir. After passing through many attractive and dreadful sights, he is exhausted and now unable to go ahead. Death ends his life, and the lifelong quest of the traveler thus ends in tragedy. The Alastor or the Spirit of Solitude. Moving ahead, we have got again is another important work, The Revolt of Islam. The chief characters are Lone and Sithna. They have dedicated their lives to you know, the cause of liberty and freedom. They are presented as the true freedom fighters. The main theme of this poem is to glorify liberty and work for the liberation of mankind. Sintha's united work with Lone uh, rouses the spirit of revolt among the heroic souls who rise against their tyrants and try to throw off the oppression exercised upon the people professing Islam. This revolt is temporarily successful. Soon the tyrants come back with increased forces and bring desolation, famine, and plague with them. This Lone and Senta are burnt alive. So the revolt of Islam is a kind of thing. Then England 1899, it is a sonnet that he had written in 1814. Uh, so it is a 14-line sonnet metered in iambic pentameter. The famous quote from this is, "Religion Christless, godless, religion Christless, godless, a book sealed, a senate times worst statue, unrepealed, unrepealed, are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illuminate our tempestuous day. His a famous work, Prometheus Unbound, again published in 1820, covers. It is a four acts lyrical drama by Shelley, published in 1820. It is concerned with torments of Greek mythological figure Prometheus, who defies the gods and gives fire to humanity, for which he is subjected to eternal punishment and suffering at the hands of Zeus. It is inspired by the classical Promethea trilogy of plays by Aeschylus. It is a closet drama. Shelley's play concerns Prometheus' release from captivity, but unlike Aeschylus' versions, there is no reconciliation between Prometheus and Jupiter, that is Zeus. So the play begins, the Act 1 and 2 especially, in the Indian Crocus, where Titan Prometheus is bound to a rock face and he is surrounded by the Oceanides, Panther, and Lone. Act 3 scene takes place in heaven. Act 4 opens. A voice fills the forest near Prometheus' cave as Lone and Panther sleep. Shelley compares his romantic hero Prometheus to Milton's Saturn from Paradise Lost. And this is all about the work from uh, P.B. Shelley, again a kind of a prominent figure from our text, right? That we are talking about. Now, before we move to Lord Byron, who remains one of the prominent figure, uh, before we move to talk about Lord Byron, let us take a break for 5 minutes and come back. William Wordsworth, S.J. Coleridge, P.B. Shelley, and two of the other prominent figures. Now, let us begin talking about Lord Byron. Lord Byron, who lived between 1788 to 1824, is a famous Byron. No, he's a Byronian character or is a Byronian hero. He is famous for his Byron hero. His full name is George Gordon Noel Byron. Lord Byron is famous for his lengthy poems Don Juan, Child Harold's Pilgrimage, and the short lyric She Walks in a Beauty, a very famous one. He lived in Italy for 7 years, then he joined the Greek War of Independence, for which he revered as a national hero, and he died at the age of 36 due to high fever. He was castigated in his life for his aristocratic excesses, including huge debts, numerous love affairs with people of both sexes, rumors of a scandalous liaison with half sister, and self imposed exile. Then, at the age of 10, he inherited the English barony of Byron of Rochdale, becoming Lord Byron, and inherited the ancestral home Newstead Abbey. He became a celebrity in 1812 after the publication of two cantos of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. He fell in love with Lady Caroline Lamb, who called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know. He felt isolated as he was being teased for his withered leg and his Scottish accent. Now, in order to escape his debts, he went to foreign exile in 1816. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, you know, it is a canto, is an autobiographical epic poem showing his influence of Spencer, influence of Spencer on him, and he wrote first canto in London. He wrote the other cantos of Childe Harold and Don Juan in Italy. Then he traveled to Greece in 1823 to participate in a Greek nationalism to fight against the Turks. He died in Greece. Goethe called him as a Don Juan a work of boundless genius. No, he also said about him that he has a sharp and penetrating view of the world and a song of his own. Byron wrote, I awoke and found myself famous after the publication of first two cantos of Childe Harold Pilgrimage in 1812. In 1822, Lie, Lee Shelley traveled to Italy where they published political journal The Liberal. Now his major work, Don Juan, it is a satiric poem of Byron called Magnum Opus. It is written in 17 cantos, so it is called an epic. No, he published the first two cantos anonymously in 1819. In Canto 3, he expresses his determination of for poets as a Wordsworth and Coleridge. In a letter to Francis Hodgson, he referred to Wordsworth as a Thirdsworth. It is about the legend Don Juan who is easily seduced by women. He could not complete its 17th canto because of his death in 1824. It starts with the birth of Don Juan who has an affair with a friend of his mother. On finding on is sent to Cadiz where his ship wrecks and he survived but then meets a pirate's daughter whose men sell on as a slave. His major works include Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, The Gayor, The Parisina, then The Siege of Corinth, then Don Juan, picaresque novel in verse, then Hours of Idleness, then English Bards and Scotch Reviews, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, then Hebrew Melodies, Prometheus, Manfred, Beppo in Autorima, then Vision of Judgment. It is a parody of Saudi, written in reply to A Vision of Judgment, and it is written in Ottawa Rima. She walks in a beauty, and then the bridge of Abydos, then Sian and a mystery. And so this is all about Charles Lamb. Oh, no, sorry, Lord Byron, who remains again one of the prominent figure. Moving ahead, we have got W.S. Lander. His full name is Walter Stavis Lander. He is famous for his poem Imaginary Conversations and the poem Il- Rose Ilmer. It is a composition of love poems. He is described as a poet's poet and author of author of a greatest and a very short conversation, right? Uh, Poems in English. Lander's prose is best expressed by the imaginary conversations, and he was born in Warwick, England. Rose Aylmer and Rose Painter both are written by Landor. So W.S. Landor remains again one of the famous personalities. Moving ahead, we have a Mary Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was an English novelist, short story dramatist, essayist, biographer, and a travel writer. She is best known for her Gothic novel Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus. Her father was William Godwin and mother was Mary Wollstonecraft. Her mother died when she was just 11 years old. She became pregnant to P.B. Shelley without marriage. They married in 1816 after the suicide of P.B. Shelley's first wife, Harriet. Mary read her father's book Memoirs of the Author of Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1788, and while A Vindication of the Rights of Women is by her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. Frankenstein was published anonymously in 1818. Clary Claremont was Mary's stepsister and Byron's mistress. Matthew Lewis called Mary as a first poetess of romantic fiction. Walpurgo is the historical novel by her, and Frankenstein was dedicated to William Godwin, her father. A semi-autobiographical novel, Loder, under the title The Beautiful Widow, was published in 1835 by her. Now, looking at her famous work, Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus, it was written in three volumes. It is about a young science student, Victor Frankenstein. Shelley started writing this novel when she was just 17 and completed at the age of 20. The first edition was published in London at 1818. So Shelley's name appeared on the second edition published in France in 1823. It's a multiple narrative science fiction. Now, no, Brian Aldiss has argued that it should be considered first true science fiction story. Uh, P.B. Shelley, Mary Byron, and Polidori decided to have a competition to see that who could write the best horror story. And after thinking for many days, Mary wrote Frankenstein. This novel contains Captain Walton's introduction, frame narrative, and Victor Frankenstein narrative, followed by Captain Walton's concluding frame narrative. Now, the plot: Robert Walton's French narrative. It starts with Captain Robert Walton, who is writing letter to his sister. The event taking place in 18th century. The novel is written in epistolary form, documenting between Captain Robert Walton and his sister Margaret Walton Saville. Saville. Walton is a failed writer who sails out to explore the North Pole and expand his scientific knowledge. Now, during the voyage, the crew spots a dog mastered by a gigantic figure. Few hours later, the crew members rescue a nearly frozen man named Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein was a man in pursuit of the gigantic figure as observed by the crew members together. Frankenstein starts recovering and he recounts the life story to Walton. Now, Frankenstein's narrative. Victor begins by telling of his childhood that he was born in Naples. Victor was obsessed with studying outdated theories that focus on simulating natural wonders. He fell in love with an orphan, Lavenza, an orphan adopted by his parents. His mother dies before he leaves for the university. At university, he developed a secret technique to import life to non-living matters, which eventually leads to the creation of monster. And because of the difficulty in replicating the minor parts of the body, he made the creature about 8 feet tall. The dream of Frankenstein remains incomplete because he could not make beautiful creations. He was unsatisfied by creatures' yellow eye and skins, so he flees. The creature because becomes sad by Victor's rejection and disappears. Victor falls ill but recovers and returns home, where he learns about the death of his brother, William. He finds the monster at the crime scene. He believed that the monster was responsible for the crime. The monster plants a picture of Justine, William's nanny, to frame her for this crime. Victor is ravaged by grief and guilt, so he retreats into mountains. The monster locates him at here, his tell, and the creature says that his encounters with people led to his fear of them, driving him in wilderness. The creature, while living near a cottage, grew fond of the family living there. He learned to speak by listening to them. He found his physical reflection was hideous when he saw his reflection in a pool. The creature burned the cottage in rage because no one in the cottage was agreeing to make friendship with him, and thus he also killed his brother William. Frankenstein's brother. The monster demands a female companion like himself. He promised Victor that he will disappear into South American wilderness if he accepts his request. So he started working on the female creature on the Orkneys island, but he is plagued by the premonitions of the disaster, particularly the idea that creating a mate for creature would breed a race that could plague mankind. So he destroys the female creature after he finds the creature, the monster looking through the window. The monster kills Henry Clerval, a friend and schoolfellow of Victor, but Victor is imprisoned for Cleverell's murder and suffers a mental breakdown in the prison. Now, after this, the story continues saying that it is released in Victor's home father, and in Geneva, Victor plans to marry Elizabeth. The night before their wedding, Victor asks Elizabeth to stay in her room while he looks for the monster. While Victor searches monster in the house and ground, the creature murders Elizabeth. Victor is grief stricken to see monster through the window killing Elizabeth. Victor's father dies of a grief through the death of William, Justine, Cleverell, and Elizabeth. Victor pursues the monster to the North Pole, but he does not kill his creation. Creature vanishes after a few days. The again another interesting cap. Now the narrative ends with Captain Walton's concluding narrative. Walton's crew insisted him to return home. While they head for home, Walton discovers the creature on the ship mourning over Frankenstein's body. The monster vows to kill himself in his own funeral pyre so that no others will ever know of his existence. Walton drifts away on an ice raft that lost in darkness, never to be seen again. The famous quote from Frankston is, "How I then, a young girl, came to think of and dilate upon so very hideous an idea." And so this is the fantastic portrayal of this story, Frankenstein, quite famous, and this is by Mary Shelley, right? So we have got those prominent works in romantic period that have created a kind of a huge amount of impact, not just on this particular literature of the contemporary people, on the world literature thoroughly, right? And so this is all about Mary Shelley. Moving ahead, again, one of the important figure we have is Anne Radcliffe. So let's go and try to find out about her. Radcliffe. She was a nickname and ward. She is regarded as the representative of Gothic novel. Exactly, it is also one of the pioneering impact of this romantic period. Exactly. So when we try to find out the thematic approach of romantic period, nature, natural element, individual expressions, feelings, emotions, and along with that a revival of historical mysterious characters, so out of which we find the Gothic novel part somehow getting evolved. And Anne Radcliffe is someone quite, we can say, uh, eagerly famous for something like this. So it is much more, even important to have a clear attention of her work also. So let's go and start talking about work. She is regarded as the representative of Gothic novel. She married to William Radcliffe, a journalist who encouraged her for her literary pursuits. So she only journeyed to Holland and Germany. Her journey was described as a journey made in the summer of 1794. Interestingly, guys, we have to keep in mind about those titles which are very important otherwise, because when we are preparing for such exams, we need to understand the levels that the poets or poetess or the literary months are attached to it, right? सो आता इथे तिने जो प्रवास केला आहे त्याचं वर्णन करणारं हे जे डिस्क्रिप्शन आहे ते फेमस आहे. आता परीक्षेमध्ये याच्याबद्दल नक्की विचारलं जाऊ शकतं, त्यामुळे हे लक्षात ठेवणं गरजेचं आहे की हर फर्स्ट नॉवेल द कॅसल ऑफ ॲथलीन अँड बेन अँड Sicilian romance were published anonymously. So her first two novels were published anonymously, that were by Anne Radcliffe, and she achieved her fame through the third novel, The Romance of the Forest, a tale of 7th century France. The Romance of the Forest, exactly. By which novel? Now we may have a list of the four novels. Okay, so we have got her four novels over here. Exactly, the Cass and Athelin and the Sicilian Romance, two novels, The Romance of the Forest, and then the Italian, which is her last work. Now, keeping in this mind, I think exactly. So, if we get a list of these, and asking by which she got a fame, definitely we have to mention the Romance of the Forest, which is based on the 17th century France. Her last work is at Italian, and Jane Austen parodied Radcliffe in her Northanger Abbey. She died of pneumonia. She is called Shakespeare of romance writers, Anne Radcliffe, right? She is regarded as the pioneer of Gothic novel. Altogether, she published six novels. Sir Walter Scott called her founder of a class or school. Jane Austen parodied her novel The Mystery of Udolpho in her Northanger Abbey, and her later novel The Italian was written in a response to Matthew Gregory Levis' The Monk. After Radcliffe's death, her husband released her unfinished essay on the supernatural in poetry, which gives a detailed view of Radcliffe's terror and Levy's horror. Let us have a look at her major works now. The Mysteries of Udolpho, published in 4 volumes. Protagonist Emily St. Aubert. Then Italian, it was written in response to Gregory Levy's The Monk, right? So we may have a question also asking that this Italian by Anne Radcliffe is written in response to whose novel or which novel? It is The Monk. It is written in response to the monk. The Romance of the Forest, the Sicilian Romance, the Castle of Atheline and Dunbayne, then the Gaston de Blondeville. It is a historical romance published by her husband after her death. So such are her six works which are quite famous. Exactly. And being a female writer, her contribution in 18th century romantic period is quite remarkable. And so we have got very prominent figures around who have portrayed her, as kind of like one of the remarkable personality. Let's move to the next one. We have got Maria Edgeworth. She was an Anglo-Irish writer of adults and children literature. She is a significant figure in the evolution of the novel in Europe, particularly. The Double Disguise is an unpublished juvenilia manuscript from her. The Castle Recreant is a regional narrative by her, her first novel also, and it is the first historical novel ever. The Edgeworth's first published work was Letters for Literary Ladies. Her work, also another one, an essay on noble science of self-justification, is written for self-justification of women, and her first children book was The Parent's Assistant, which included the celebrated short story The Purple Jar. Right, a very famous story. Otherwise, the most celebrated and the most popular one. She wrote Belinda in 1801 and became controversial for its depiction. The Practical Education is a progressive work on education which combines the idea of Locke and Rousseau with scientific inquiry. John Locke and Rousseau. Her work Belinda is in a three-volume work published in London, and it is the first full-length novel by her. Tales of Fashionable Life and you know published in 1809 and 1812 are are her two series collection of short stories which often focus on the life of a woman. Then Harrington is also another work which was written in an apology to the Jewish community. The novel was fictitious autobiography about overcoming anti-Semitism and includes first Jewish character in an English novel. So Helen is Maria's final novel, the only one she wrote after her father's death. Now let us move ahead with a very prominent figure of this period, Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott was a historical novelist, playwright, and a poet. We have to know the way we studied about when we had to talk about poetry, we had to talk about Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, Shelley, John Keats. He जशी खूप फेमस नाव आहेत ना, you know, स्पेशली पोएट्री सेक्शन करता किंवा व्हर्स करता, म्हणजे वर्ड्सवर्थ आहे, सॅम्युअल टेलर कोलरिज आहे, लॉर्ड बायरन आहे, चार्ल्स लॅम्ब आहे, त्यानंतर पुन्हा पी शेली आहे, जॉन कीट्स आहे. एक्झॅक्टली त्याचे कॉकनी पोएट्सचं ग्रुप तयार केलं होतं ना. एक्झॅक्टली. सो तो सगळा अख्खा ग्रुप आहे पोएट्स बद्दल. तसा फिक्शन बद्दल जसं बनलं ना, की जसं वर्ड्सवर्थचं किंवा कोलरिजचं नाव घेतात ना, तसं इथे त्या काळातल्या प्रोज फिक्शनसाठी सर वॉल्टर स्कॉटचं नाव घेतात. इतके इतकं इम्पॅक्टफुल काम त्यांचं यामध्ये आहे. So we have to focus on him also. Let us go and try to understand what he has done so far and his major works particularly. He collaborated with Gothic novelist Monk Lewis in Tales of Wonder in 1801. His poem, Coleridge's poem Christabel, which is written in 8-syllable couplets, inspired him to write poems in the same meter between 1805 to 1815, and he produced a succession of narrative poems which made him famous. He was the first novelist in English to present characters as a part of society. He was the inventor of true historic novel. In politics, he was strongly attached to Tories and helped to find a great Tory review, the Quarterly, in 1809. He was knighted in 1820 and published all his novels anonymously until 1827. His major works include, we've got a long list of his works: Ivanhoe or the Beastman of Glamok, Rob Roy, Old Mortality, The Lady of the Lake, Waverley, The Heart of Middleton, The Bride of Lammermoor, The Lay of the Last Minstrel, then Marmion. It is about imity of Scottish Highlander and Scottish Lowlander, then Minstrel of Scottish Border, then Kenilworth, then the Betrothed, then the uh, Talisman, History of Scotland, then Bizarro, this is incomplete novel of Walter Scott, and The Chase of William and Helen. Now, The Lady of Lake, let us have a look at his major works prominently. It is a narrative poem by Sir Walter Scott, first published in 1810. It is composed of six cantos, each of which concerns the action of a single day. Now, the poem has three main plots, and the contest among the three men, Roderick Dhu, James Fitzjames, and Malcolm Game. Then Ivanhoe, it is a romance. It is a historical novel in three volumes published in 1820. Okay. Then Waverley novels. The Waverley novels are a long series of novels, as Scott did not publicly acknowledge authorship until 1827, then took its name Waverley. The first novel of the series was released in 1814. The later books for the words by the author of Waverley on their title pages. Right? The Heart of Middleton. It was published in four volumes under the title Tales of My Landlord in 1818. No, Jenny Deans is the heroine of the novel. Heroine of the novel. We have to keep in mind. Exactly, we may have a question. The Heart of Middleton, and it's a heroine. Rob Roy. It is a historical novel narrated by Frank Osbaldeston, the son of English merchant. The narrator travels first to north of England and subsequently to the Scottish Highlands to collect a debt stolen from his father. On the way, he encounters the larger-than-life characters Rob Roy McGrath. It is, it is the period between 1811 and 1820, when King George III was deemed unfit to rule, and his son, the Prince of Wales, ruled as a proxy as a prince regent. The King William IV is also known as the Sailor King, and slavery was removed from Britain through the Reform Act of 1832. Now, again, we have got one of the prominent figure named as Robert Southey, right? And his contribution definitely is quite noteworthy. So let us continue discussing about Robert Southey in a great way. When we read the names of William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, we also have read the name, this very interesting name, Robert Southey, who plays a kind of a vital role. He was an English poet of the Romantic school and one among the three Lake poets. Exactly. So we have seen who are the Lake poets: Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Robert Southey. He was a poet laureate of England from 1813 to 1843 till his death, and he was succeeded by William Wordsworth. He became poet laureate after Walter Scott refused the post. His biographies include the life and work of John Bunyan, John Wesley, William Cowper, Oliver Cromwell, and Horatio Nelson. He was a renowned I'm sorry. He was a renowned scholar of Portuguese and Spanish literature. His most enduring contribution to literary history is children's classic, The Story of Three Bears. The original Goldilocks story, first published in his prose collection, The Doctor. He was born in Vine Street, Bristol, England. Along with St. Coleridge, he wrote The Fall of Robespierre, Robespierre, in which he wrote his first collection of poems in 1794. He used pseudonym Don Manuel Alvarez Esperilla to write letters from England. His famous fairy tale is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Southey and Coleridge were involved with early experiments with uh, nitrous oxide laughing gas conducted by the scientist Humphrey Davy. He married Edith Fricker, who was sister of Sarah Fricker, wife of S.T. Coleridge. He became poet laureate in 1813 after refused by Walter Scott, and from 1809 Southey contributed to Quarterly. About Charlotte Bronte, he said, "Literature can be the business of woman's life," and the epitaph of Southey is written by William Wordsworth. William Hazlitt was most savage critic of Southey. Southey replied his critics in a radical play, Wat Tyler. He is also famous for writing children's nursery rhymes. What are little boys made of? What are little boys made of? Snips and snails and puppy dog tails. While he was in university, he wrote, All I learned was a little swimming and a little beating. His major works include The Fall of Robespierre in collaboration with S.T. Coleridge, Joan of Arc, an epic poem, also written by G.B. Shaw and Mark Twain. Thalaba, the Destroyer, The Life of Nelson, Roderick, The Last of the Goths, The Doctor, Madoc, The Curse of Khema, and The Tale of Paraguay, then A Vision of Judgment. Now, Thalaba, a destroyer. It is an epic poem. It was completed while Saudi traveled Portugal. The story describes how a group of sorcerers worked to destroy the Hodiar's family in an attempt to prevent a prophecy of their future doom from coming true. Right. Then we have the Curse of Khema. Again, it is an epic poem composed by Saudi. The origin of the poem can be traced to Saudi's school days when he suffered from insomnia along with his memories of dark and mysterious schoolmate that later formed his basis for one of the poem's villains. Then Joan of Arc, an epic poem which goes with like it is an epic poem by Robert Southey. Coleridge also helped him writing this poem of 1798 edition, but in later editions, Coleridge's collection was deleted. The poem is divided into two halves. First, describing John's quest to meet Charles the Dauphin of France. Then finally, she got the Dauphin support and begins to lead the French military. The secondary half describes the French defeat of the British army's Orleans. The poem ends with Charles crowned as a king of France. Now, is another important work that includes Curse of Khema. This poem is divided into 12 books. Half part of the book describes how the evil priest Khema is able to gain significant amounts of demonic power on a quest of becoming a god. Then the poem describes Hindu myth. It is heavily influenced by Zoroastrian theology. It focuses on Indian stems from the recent British colonial expansion into India and the increasing interest by British citizens in Indian culture. The Curse of Khema. Then the Satanic School. You know, the term Satanic School was name applied by Robert Southey in his A Vision of Judgment to a class of writers headed by Byron and Shelley because, according to him, their productions were characterized by a satanic spirit of pride and audacious impiety. Right? So, Southey was mocked by Lord Byron in his third canto of Don Juan, including Wordsworth and Coleridge. Exactly. So, these rivals could be also noticed. So, this was all about the great romantic poets so far we have discussed, by the way. Let's move and uh, revise of the people that we have discussed so far, right? So in today's lecture series we have tried to cover a few romantic writers and poets play a kind of a classic role. So some famous figures like Lord Byron, exactly, then somebody like P.B. Shelley, then